to the Lien Writer seminar. Today we're going to be going over the basics on our program. This is a little bit different than when we have one of our full training seminars. Those usually last between 3 and 4 hours, and we go through every item in the system. What we're going to be talking today about is basically how to get the information in to do your jobs, how to do your releases and your mechanics liens. Now, to start with, we'll go ahead and go over what the program is. Lien Writer is a program designed to do mechanics lien paperwork. And there are as many different rules on that in the various 50 states, 11 Canadian provinces, and the U.S. territories, as there are those units exist. And what we've tried to do over the years is make it as simple as possible to do a single entry screen and then have the form go out accordingly for each of the states. Now, to start with, whenever you boot the program, you come up with this screen. This is called the current job screen. Now, I'm going to expand it a bit just so it's easier to see. And this is basically the information you put in for any particular job you're working on. When you do use it, you're going to be setting up basically the job that you're going to be doing a preliminary notice on, okay? The most important thing to remember on this is you need to have these first 5 screens filled in with information, okay? These establish the parties. You always, first of all, have a customer for your system. Okay, this is very important. The customer is the person you have contracted with. And we are going to be giving notice of this customer and your service to them to the owner and general contractor. And why this is important is because we want to get the information in to determine what is going to be going on in the job and why everybody has to be paid here. Okay, any questions on anything so far? Okay, when you've installed the Lien Writer program on your system and you've set it up either for single-use operation or we've connected you up via a network, you're putting in all the information that you know about a job, and you're going to try and make that information as complete as possible. There are some caveats in that, okay? You want to have the information displayed as accurately as possible. I'm going to be talking about opposing counsel. That means the attorney for your customer, your public entity or owner, the direct contractor or lender. And we always regard those guys, unfortunately, as the enemy, because most of the courts are going to look at you guys askance when you file preliminary notices. And unless you've done everything correctly, you're going to give an open field for them to try to defend their owner or general or lender or surety. It's important that the information you put in is as accurate as possible. When you start a job, any particular job, you're always going to have the customer first, all right? Now, how we add jobs whenever you start is you press the Add Job button. Now, you'll notice that everything is blank. You press this Add Job, and this is for the complete job. You don't press it for every one of these units. I've had people do that where they've pressed one for the customer, then press Add a Job for the project, etc. Pressing Add Job is for everything in here on a particular job that you're doing. First of all, whenever you put it in, there's always going to be, right here, you choose the company, okay? Now, I've got this one in this particular job set, and when I put it in, it will look up all the information for that job. This stuff is set up in the company setup file, which we'll talk about a little bit later, okay? But this has all of the information in that you need to worry about. There is always a project, state, or province you're going to be putting in, okay? Now, let's just say it's for California. When you put in CA, it's going to assume, now, most of the states, that's going to say a material company, but we have material supplier because that's for California, because that's what is specifically requested by the state. Okay, next you're going to put a job or invoice number. Now it's important on this, okay? This is your job or invoice number. Now, if you don't have one or you're not sure of it or whatever, don't put it in, all right? Because that will be one of the things opposing counsel will come in and say, well, you filed for the wrong job. Now, this is internal to you. You've assumed that you put all the rest of the parties correctly, but I've seen this argued. I don't know if anybody's prevailed with it, but it's important. But let's say that the job you have is set up like this, okay? Now, you can use any job number you want or invoice number. The fact of a job number and why it's superior to an invoice number is one job number can cover many invoices. If you file an invoice number with this thing, the problem is you could have opposing counsel come back and say, oh, you didn't lien for the right invoice number. Yeah, they're that petty. So if nothing else, don't put anything in here. If you know a job number, then put it in. Customer number is something you can look up in the system. Let's say it's this guy's, okay? Now, there's no customer number in this particular one, but if you did have a customer number, this is your customer number. And it's how you would look it up. You can simply type in the name also. Let's see, T-R-I-U-S-N-C. It found the name because this is already in your system, okay? Customers, owners, general contractors, and lenders always have two fields here for putting a name information in here. That simply means that if the name of the company that you're going to be doing this pre-lien on exceeds 70 characters, it'll scroll to this next screen. And you just can put in the name in. You always put in an address. Now, I have a P.O. box number. P.O. box is okay if you're just serving the customer, but as much as possible, I always encourage you to use addresses if you know them. For a project, you always use the legal address of the property, not a P.O. box number. Most of the courts will reject that if you do. You've got to name a specific property. You put in the address. You can put in, you'll notice it fills in the blank here according to what you have named. If you put in a zip code, it will look it up. Whoops, excuse me. And see, there's everything, all right? I encourage you to start putting USA in because especially if you deal with Canada, you want to specify the country on your mailings, all right? The certified number, the certified warning number, and the certified claim certified number, these are things will be added later, all right? The certified number, you can put a certified number that you do for a mailing because every notice you put out has to go certified mail. It cannot go regular mail. I can't emphasize that enough. You don't send it certified, the opposing counsel is going to say it was never served. So you got to have the proof of service, or at least of the proof of an attempt to serve it. Now, why is that important? Because many of the courts will say that it shows that if it wasn't picked up by an owner or a general or whatever, a lot of the courts now will presume these guys are trying to avoid service. And they will fine for you. But it's got to be important. It's got to go to the right address. Got to have a certified number on it. You can put in a phone number, a fax number, and an email. These are mostly just to reference these things if you need to do something later. But they are available on all three types of customers, all right? You have print customer notice. In the state of California, the program knows who's supposed to get a notice. For example, the owner and the direct contractor always will receive a notice, okay? A lender in the state of California can be important, or the surety on a public job. Now, everybody knows the lender is the person who's lending money on the job. A surety is somebody who is providing on public jobs a bond to protect the job and make sure it gets paid. You want to make sure the surety gets a notice. If you've got a public job, you undoubtedly have a surety because a surety is required on any job over $25,000. It's very rare any of you are going to do a job less than 25 and where it's a public job. So make sure the surety gets a notice, all right? Now, California changed the law on that in 2012. So if some of you were not sending a notice to the surety, make sure you do now. Okay? When you print a customer notice, you always want to send it certified mail. Now, I mentioned it doesn't automatically send a notice on the customer in the state of California. Some states it goes out anyway. Nevada, you must notify the customer, but if you've got the project set as a Nevada project, it will know what's going on. Once you have actually, now you can check here a joint check. If you check this, any preliminary notice you send out is going to make a joint check claim. Now, what will that do? That protects you in the event that the owner has done a joint check to you and the customer for payment. All right, so if you're using joint check agreements with your customers because basically you don't trust them, then you want to check that so the owner and the general contractor are always notified about it. What's the advantage of using a joint check agreement? If you've got a signed one, and we do have one in our system for doing a joint check agreement, then you instantly make the owner legally, the owner and the general contractor legally liable to you. I mean, you can go to court and just sue them if they sign a joint check agreement and you weren't paid. Okay, any questions on anything I've gone over so far? All right. When you print a job, it will check the box here. Now, what's the advantage of the box being checked? That way you know a notice has been sent to a particular party. Most often it happens when people are sending out like a letter to the owner and direct contractor, but they find out there's a surety involved and they haven't sent a notice. You can come here and reprint a job, and if these two guys are checked, but this one isn't, a notice will go out to this guy now because these guys have already got notices. Okay, you can set a thing up for a monthly release. Now, a monthly release is where you've got a job where you have to do a release every month, and you're aware you're going to do a release every month for a party. What's the advantage? You can come up here to waivers and releases, and you can say, I want to do my monthly releases, and then every job you've got in here that is still in the current jobs, it'll come up in order, and you can just do a release for them. Just bang, 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 bang. It just makes it a lot easier to get out releases when you know you got to do one every month. A release cycle is where you declare that besides a monthly release, you have a time of month you're going to do it. It can be the 1st, the 10th, the 20th, or something like that, but it's something that identifies here what release cycle you're going to be doing this on. A marked record is a job that is marked for some operation, usually printing a preliminary notice. What happens is if you have the record marked, then you can't even do mass mailings. Like up here, you can say, well, we've put in jobs all week, we've marked them all, now I want to print them, and it'll print every marked record you have in there, and then after it's done, it'll ask you, I've printed them all, do you want me to unmark them now? You unmark them, then you start next week's work. It's just a way to do things in mass and keep track of it. Okay, process submitted. Those are two things for where you're using a large system and you have to keep track of them. I won't go into these two, but when you have marked a record for process and then submitted, that means it's been processed and then it's been submitted to the customer. Paid. Any job marked paid in here, you've declared you're done with this job. What's the advantage of this? You can come up here on the current jobs for history and you can say, hey, it's the end of the month. I've marked everybody who I've knows paid. move these guys to history. I just sent out an email regarding this on the importance of keeping your current jobs and your history jobs separate from each other. Now, the advantage of that is, probably most companies, and I suppose you guys are fairly typical, probably have between 40 and 200 jobs active at any given times. They could have thousands, tens of thousands in the history records. What the advantage of this is you can, if you mark them paid, then you get them out of the current jobs. You don't have to worry about them anymore. It just makes it easier to find records. Okay? Alt-marked. Alt-marked is something you can use up here to do other things with the records, and some of them are declared as alt-marked. So you know who they are. Marked is for doing mass printing of certain records. Alt-marked is an alternative to it. It's most often used when you're going to do like releases or things like that, and you want to declare you've been marking all your records for doing preliminary notices. You can use alt-marked for anybody who got to do mass printing of releases. Just makes it easier to track them. AR number, oh, that's something old. We used to have this in here for people who needed to track in their records, in their accounting program, by an AR number. This has almost become obsolete now. You can use this field for anything you like as a searchable field, but it was originally to have an AR number to refer to something in your accounting package. And finally, on this first page, we have the PO order or job number. This is your customer's PO or job number. This is different than yours. This is your job or invoice number. Okay, any questions on the first page on getting information into the system? Okay, then let's move to this next part. We have the project. Okay, the project is very, very important because this is the project you are working on. And again, the courts are going to want to see that you've done certain things in here. Now, you notice we have 3 lines for names. The reason why that is 3 70-character lines, 210 characters you can put for a project name. This is really important for some, like the state of California. Good Lord, they want a project and they've got often they have 200 characters in the name on that project. This simply gives you a way of covering the entire name in here, all right? Don't put an address up in these projects. I found some customers were doing that. You've got to have the legal address for the property here, not up here. This is just the name of the project. Okay, you put a legal address. Now let's say, okay, Joe's project. Okay, now many people ask me, do I have to use upper lowercase on my things? Can't I just put the caps key on and put all caps? Yes, you can. All right, I don't have any particular reason to deny people to do this either way, except I had fights when I was making all the jobs caps and all the jobs upper and lower case. So I gave you the option to declare on a job how you want to do it. You can simply, you can go through here and you can declare that everything in this thing is supposed to be, for example here, uppercase, and it will be uppercase. What's the legal advantage? There's none. There's none except it's the way your company does business, and that's fine. All right, well, 1000 Main Street. Again, you put in a zip code. It knows where it's at, okay? Now, all jobs, by definition, the majority of the jobs most people do are commercial projects, private works, okay? You can over here to make determinations how that job is going to be different. If it's a public job, you want to check this box. That does make a different kind of a notice go out. That can be important. All right, if it's a federal jobs are completely different, and you check that, and then it automatically becomes a public job. You can't have a federal job that is not a public job, as you will note. A residential job, I added this originally for a number of states, including California, because there was going to be difference in the residential kind of notice, okay? Some states have a two-tier notice. In other words, they got one for commercial jobs. They got one for residential jobs. You've got to know the difference between the two, and it is important. California, it doesn't matter because they didn't do that particular part of the law. For those of you who are doing professional services, this is like research on the property, information to get the job set up before they even begin a project. You can send out a special notice on professional services, all right? This protects you just like a preliminary notice does, but you've got to note if that's the kind of work you're into. Equipment, tools, that's not important to anybody doing work in California, but there are states that require a different notice for materials and a different notice for labor and a different notice for equipment, tools. If you have one of those states and you've got equipment, tools, you check that box. A bonded job, this is where you know there is a surety bond on the property, okay? And we got ways of handling that if you got a lender and a surety like that. But what you do on the bonded job is you click this, and then when the notice goes out, it will note that it is a bonded job. Okay, now, USA Native American land, there is a difference on the notice you've got to do. They have the USA, if you have Native American land, most of those jobs are good now. I mean, a lot of the casinos they're building and stuff, man, those guys pay like clocks now, all right? But you want to note if it is a Native American land, the notice that goes out will be just mildly different. It's to try to protect you on it. But be aware that on Native American land, you're at the mercy of the tribal council deciding if you're going to get paid. And if they don't want to pay you, then you've got to take an action in federal court to try to recover it. So I'm really making this note on that while we have this checkbox here. If you are working on Native American land, be sure to check it. Now, the APN number, the assessor's parcel number, if you know it and you're positive that's the property you want to do the pre-lien on, you put in the parcel number. Now, you can put in, just by separating like that, several parcels if you have to. And it will cover all of them. But again, I can't emphasize enough. APN number, if you're saying you're doing the property and you got the wrong APN number, opposing counsel is going to come in and say, oh, you never pre-liened the correct property. And I know judges have found for this. So you may not want to use the APN number. The APN number is really handy when you're finally doing a mechanics lien, because then you want to name the APN number, and I would put it in then. On preliminary notices, maybe not so much. Okay, building permit number. This is something that was going to be a big problem. San Francisco wanted to have all building permit numbers on their prelims, etc. And then all the courts, all the states said, no, we're not going to put building permit numbers in there. I still have it. If you have a building permit number and you know it, and it is the correct one, then go ahead and put it in. It is available to you, but it's not necessary, because I want to emphasize that. Voucher number is also here, and you'll find it under the lender here. This is a voucher number, and some of the state jobs in the state of California require a voucher number to make sure you guys are paid directly. If you know the correct voucher number, put it in there, and then they will have the record of it when they get their notice, and they'll make sure you get paid. Okay, any questions on the project page? Anything you wanted to know about? Okay, we'll move next to the owner. Now, owner has got several options here, okay? Sometimes the owner is the same name as your customer. Sometimes the owner is the same as the project name. Now, if you want to copy that instead of enter everything, you simply hit this button, and boom, the project's all brought over for you. If you have an owner contract number, you want to put that in there. If this owner or the person that is requested the project is a lessee, this happens a lot with malls and things like that. You may want to note the lessee here, and then you may also want to go over to other legal parties and list the actual owner of the property. Now, the problem with that is sometimes the owner will have an exclusion policy in their contract, and if you do hit the owner, he's going to send you a copy of the exclusion contract, and then you can't go after the owner then. So it's important you do note this information and you get all the parties served correctly. Now, it's going to make the presumption that there's an owner notice and it is sent certified mail. It must always be sent certified mail for owner and general contractor. Once you've printed a job, it checks here. Okay, any questions on the owners or establishing an owner relationship? Okay, direct contractor. Now, this would be, it's unusual. California is the only one that names a direct contractor specifically in preliminary notices. This is because you can have you could have 2, 3, 4, as many generals of a job as are necessary to get the job done. And California law kind of specifies when someone is a direct contractor, when they are a subcontractor, etc. All right. Every other state in the union, every other province in Canada names the general contractor, but that's why it's different. Now, a direct contractor, you could have had that from the customer, and if we do that, then we simply bring this over. This is the direct contractor now. If there's a direct contractor number and you do have that number, put it on there. It just helps identify you more closely. There's a general notice and a certified mail must always go out to them. Any questions on the general contractor? Okay, now we'll go to lender, surety, and other, okay? Occasionally, you will have a job that has no lender or surety, but you could have one additional owner, one additional public entity, one additional contractor, or one additional customer. Now, rather than have to use other legal parties, which you can put these parties in, you can change this one so you simply can say, oh, the owner lender is somebody I want, somebody I'm drawing in one of these 4 items, okay? Now, you can go to a lender surety. Again, you can look up a lender surety. Let's find somebody who knows a lender here. Here we go, all right. And you can simply put the lender in this way. Didn't have a mistake. Okay, there is a phone, fax, and email that you can put in there. There is a bond or account number. This is important when identifying a lender or a surety. You want to put in the bond or account number here. And in state of California, sometimes they have a voucher number. And if you do have that, you need to put that in there also. It is not required under the law, but if anybody's ever dealt with the state of California, they'll be a lot happier if there's a voucher number declared and you put it in there. If you send it certified, if you do have one, you just click it as you click it as certified mail, and then whether it is to be printed, and then when it gets printed, that box will check. Any questions on using the lender surety other? Okay. Now, before we move to dates and dollars, where you're establishing your amounts and things like that, let's go over here to other legal parties. Normally, you have these 4 entities on most jobs, all right? And I know we have the jobs where you've got additional legal parties. It could be other owners, tenants, or agents, other contractors besides the general that you need to identify, and other lenders or sureties. Most often, this is used where you have a lender and a surety. Only when you fill out a section, you have to add a section, first of all. Okay, we add one. And then you have to add in a person here. And I'm going to say it's this company. All right. It's all set up now to do it, and when you close it, you'll notice there's one additional legal party now. This is merely to remind you guys there are additional legal parties. It is important that you identify everybody who is a legal party in a particular prelim, and you get them all served. The old saying about shoot them all, let God sort them out. Well, lien them all, and then we'll figure it out in court if we have to. But most of the time when somebody gets a notice, they pay attention, and when they start paying attention, that helps you guys get paid. Okay, dates and dollars is the other important thing. Now, it always presumes when I added this one, this is today's date, okay? Now, this may change. This could have been for a job you're doing because you have, in the state of California, you have 20 days to do a preliminary notice to protect your job right back to the first date. You declare that you began the performance on this date, that's when it goes to. You can put a date performance ended in here. This is usually for you material suppliers where you're dropping off, a huge bunch of product. You drop it off, you're done with the job, okay? Then you could put in a date here and say, okay, we put it in this date, we finished it on this date, and that's how it's going to go from there, okay? If you do that, got everybody covered, and you know what it was for. In every state but Texas, you put in an estimated or contract amount, and we'll say here it's $10,000, all right? Now, people ask me all the time, what happens if I exceed the $10,000? State of California said that if you have a job up to 10% over of the job amount, your pre-lien is good, okay? If you guys got original job of 10,000 and suddenly on, let's say on the 15th, they suddenly jack it up to 30,000. This happens, all right? Our strong suggestion is you do an additional preliminary notice on the same job. It's easy to do that. You can simply hit the F9 key, and it'll create a duplicate record of all your information, and you can do another preliminary notice on these guys. Now, why is this important? It's because California does not allow amended preliminary notices. We had a big to-do with that back in about 2007, and the courts, all the other courts in the nation said, no, of course you can simply extend a preliminary notice. No, they said you got to do a new preliminary notice, so that's what you got to do. Can't emphasize that enough. Now, a balance due. Balance due is usually what you've got when you start doing releases. I'm not going to put anything in here, and I'll show you how you can change all that. But you're going to have a balance due, a release amount, and an amount released, and if there's any retainage. Now, that usually applies to Texas preliminary notices, so don't worry about that right now. But now we've got everything more or less set up to print your notices, okay? You can calendar things here. You'll notice that this thing sets up a calendar date of today, and it presumes 30 days. You can change that amount of time, but usually you should follow up with a job within 30 days. And if you tell it to, you will calendar an Outlook for you. What's the advantage? Yeah, we can go look our calendar up here any given time. But the problem is you got to have the program open to do it. By calendaring an Outlook, it simply remembers everything. And if you got to remember something to do on this job, it's a quick way to make a note of it. Okay, now I'm going to run over these other fields really quickly, and then I'll show you how to print notices, etc. Accounting data is simply accounting data for anything that you're doing with the accounting system. Most of you are not even going to worry about this. This is where you're actually doing the service of doing preliminary notices for some company. Okay, notes. This is where notes are kept in the file about every single thing you've done. You need to keep your own notes, that's fine. You can come in here and put them in yourself. You can put a notes about when it was entered, etc. It even notes your station ID. And you can ask it to look up a station ID again. Okay, that's what it says. All right. User-defined fields. What are these for? These are fields that you can set up yourself for your particular needs, okay? Now, you'll notice I activated one field, a checkbox, that simply says flake. This prints nowhere else. But it gives you an idea if you want to say, okay, what is this guy? He's a flake. Okay, then I'm going to give special attention to him. But it doesn't print anywhere. And I probably wouldn't use flake if you want to, in case you want to get subpoenaed or something. But that gives you an idea what you can do with it. Trust fund, property description, labor materials. You can set up your jobs with specific information about what your labor materials are, etc. You can also, in the company thing, set up an extended trust fund or customer information. Now, why would this be important? If you've got a trust fund to deal with, and ever since they changed the law in California, this is not used very much, you can put in the trust fund company. This is where your customer tells you, okay, I am setting up a job, but I've got this trust fund you got to worry about. You put the trust fund information in there, and that way they're protected if you file a mechanics lien. Property description. Normally, the property address you put in here is sufficient, okay? The worst time is when you have a project, you don't have a good description of it. Then you may want to put the legal description in there. You got to get that from a recorder's office or a county, etc. And that can be important. But normally, like I said, the regular street address is sufficient. But if you don't have an address, if you're dealing with raw land, you might want to name the property description. Labor materials, this is rarely used. Most of the time, the things you set up in company are going to specifically state labor or materials. You put labor, you could put in, drywall materials. Whatever. You got to make a declaration, though, of what you're serving them for. If you're doing a job that is out of the ordinary and you want to put in a detailed description of what you're doing, you can. But most companies aren't going to do this. Okay, now we've got all the information in on a job. The next thing to do is we got to get out a document, okay? Normally your document is going to be your preliminary notices. Now, you're able to do either plain paper notices or pettit forms. For those of you who don't know what a pettit form is, it is a pre-printed form, has a certified return on it if you want. It always has a certified number on it. It prints on 8.5 by 14 paper. And literally, you can simply print them, fold them, and mail them. They're really, really clean that way. And you can also specify whether you actually want to sign the document or you simply want to put out the notice and be done with it. I'll get to that in just a minute. But you can use either preliminary notices that are plain paper, and then you've got to stuff them, fold them in envelopes and things like that, put on the green sticker, etc., or you can just use the pettit forms. When you go to print, it's going to ask some specific questions. Most of this has been pre-set up in the company, so you're not going to have to worry about it, all right? You go to print. If you've got the certified number set up, that's what it's going to use. And we'll print in this. And when you use pettit forms, this normally comes up. And then it prints out the notice. This is a California Preliminary Notice Private Works. This is the notice that will go out to all of your customers. Okay? You'll notice we have it for signatures. That's because I've set it up and I have a signature line on it. Signature line is not required. An identification of the claiming party is. Okay? And you print that notice, and that's what you fold, stuff, and mail to your parties. That's how easy it is to put a preliminary notice out. Now, I've given you a lot of information. I don't want anybody to be panicked about it, about all these different fields. These fields are for your use. Basically, you put in the information about who's supposed to receive it, where the project's at, what kind of a project it is, who the parties are, and print them. It's normally just that simple. Now, when there's other things you can do, all right? Pettit forms are very, very simplified, and they're good for 99% of the work you're going to do. But you may get a job where you need to have an owner letter sent out, which you can specify in your system if you want. It'll do it for Pettit forms. You can do exhibits for Pettit forms. You can do a plain paper copy of a Pettit form, the stuff in your file. Okay, now lien waiver and release of rights is the other important thing in here that a lot of people don't use, and I really encourage them. Number one, our lien waivers and releases are absolutely accurate, and the ones that are required by statute for every state in the union, for every Canadian province, okay? I know if you send this out, it's legal. Now, I don't care what the attorneys may complain about or whatever. It's probably because when they do complain, they're usually looking to put one over on you. You can even have them notarized, though it's not actually required, okay? When you go to print a waiver or release of rights, the progress payment, the conditional on progress is the absolutely safest notice you can get out. It basically says, I'm releasing this person through this particular date, and the only requirement is I've got to get cash in the bank. All right, so they use a conditional on progress, and they come back to you and say, oh, haha, you give me a release, and then I got my money anyway. You go, haha. Well, then I'm going to lien your owner because it says you specifically have to pay me. Now, we said it was a $10,000 claim. Let's say it's $5,000 here. That we're going to, the current balance is, excuse me, $10,000. We're going to release 5. All right. There's no amount disputed. Amount disputed is usually used for unconditional on finals, where you're saying, okay, I'm conditional on final. I'm giving them a release, but I'm still claiming about $8,000 or something like that. That will really, really upset your customer, and it'll really upset the owner. It usually is a good way to get paid. All right, paid to date, if you know it, we'll say there's nothing paid to date so far. You can from date. A from date is a handy date to have, but if you want to simply say it is backwards, everything, I'm releasing everything time backwards, then that's what you do, and then you say what date it is good through. Now, the program presumes 1 month before. You can put any date you want in here. All right, a spoiler for California customers also, okay? California, back in 2012, came up with this brilliant idea that you've got to name any unpaid releases in your system that you haven't been paid before. So you would say something like, okay, I've got one for 10/10/2018 for $4,000 that I didn't get paid. Why you want to do that? Because this one, they could say in court that, well, you gave us, this one is irrelevant and it's not, we're only going to pay on this one because you guys didn't name it. Okay, there's been court cases on this now. And they did provide for that in the legislature when they made the new law. And this is how you protect yourself, all right? If you're doing a release again for somebody and you don't have your prior release paid, please put it in here. Okay? Normally, you're going to send, the customer's going to issue the payment, but you can specify the owner or the general also. And who will receive the payment? When you've got a joint check agreement, sometimes you got to say your customer and you, or if you have an owner with a general, your customer and you, then you print this one. That's how the release has to come. Okay, you go to print. This is the kind of release. Now you'll notice this release looks different than every other state in the union. This is because California releases are now statutory. And they've got to name a certain amount of information here. Okay? You always have to sign a release. Somebody in your company has to authorize the release of it. Okay. All right. Now, the last thing I'm going to go over on the printed thing today, there are many other features in here that you can use, but these are the ones that are the important ones, is doing your bond or lien claim itself, okay? Now, we go over a bond or lien claim. We've got an estimated amount, how much your job thinks it's worth, et cetera, et cetera. We come here to print. It depends if you need a notary on a mechanics lien on the county in the state of California. There are counties, if you send along a notarized release, they will send you a nasty note back with your notary on it, and it will say that, okay, we filed it, but we don't need a notary. You send it to another county, and they'll send you a nasty release back and your mechanics lien back saying, oh, you didn't send the notary, you're in trouble. Find out if your county required, or the county you're required in, is requiring a notice. And get this, there can be several different places to file it within a county. And I've had cases where one city says you got to file a notary, another city, same county, says, why are you doing this? We don't need this. So you'll have to establish that when you file the notary. Okay, then it go to print. Then it's going to ask, okay, what's the date? What's usually the end date if you've got one? If it's a continuing one, you state it's continuing. If you don't have a end date at all or the use is unknown, you can simply say unknown. All right, your performance date ended. You can use the completed date. Okay. You can use it again, the completed date, a continuing date, etc. Now, why would you have continuing? Because that's where you've had to file a mechanics lien on the guy, but you've got to keep it open because he may come back to you for more. Now, why you'd want to give him more, I don't know, but I have had companies do that anyway. All right. Correct completion date. If you have a correct completion date, and we'll say, whoops, 11/12. Okay, 2018. Okay, that's fine. Now, this was the amount originally agreed upon, the actual amount you're doing the mechanics lien for. The amount owing is, we can say it is $10,000. Bill? And any anticipated legal costs. Now, again, different counties allow different things. Most of the time, though, I do not recommend in the state of California that you put anticipated costs. You can put up to 25% of costs in some counties, et cetera, but you'll have to determine that. And what's the advantage? Well, you guys get a bill for $10,000 and suddenly you're slapping on another $2,500. That usually gets them calling up screaming about paying it. And then you could be really magnanimous and say, all right, you pay me the $10,000, I'll drop the $2,500. Doesn't really matter. You then go print it. You want to preview it on the screen. You can look at it. This prints out a mechanics lien, the legal requirement for filing with the county recorder's office. You must sign them. Can't emphasize that enough. And it prints out the correct number of forms, etc. Okay, then it'll ask if you want to print it, and we'll just say no here. All right. Now, the last thing I'm going to mention today is there are other things you can do, like amend a lien claim. You can't do that in California. You can do it in other states. If you've got to amend your lien claim, I recommend that you simply do a new bond or lien claim for the additional amount in the state of California. You can do a bond or lien claim extension, which is legal in California. And what you do is, let's say you've got the direct contractors taken off to Argentina now, all right? And this actually happened with one of my clients. Took off to Argentina. The customer did not want to have the mechanics lien on there because my client was planning to lien the property permanently. We came up with a bond or lien claim extension agreement, whereas the owner is agreeing and you can use a promissory note along with this to make payments to you, and then his lien goes on like iron plate. It stays on there until you are paid in full. If he wants to do a release of it by selling the home or something like that, you can do that. It's easy enough. You can simply do a verified escrow claim, and you tell him, okay, I'll agree to it, but my lien's going to have to be paid off. Okay, and then the bond or lien claim release, once you are paid, whether it's a settlement or you've gotten your money in full, etc., you guys are required, where you file the mechanics lien, you are responsible for doing the release. Now, I know often the customer's calling up saying, well, I want you to send the release to me. That is fine. I would simply send a letter out saying, okay, sir, you've asked for this. We're sending this to you. You take it to your company. You need to file it. Otherwise, you need to do it. You need to file it with the county recorder's office. If you have an instrument number, you can simply put the information about that in. California doesn't require a book or page now. It's all by instrument number. Different states have different requirements. So you can state when you actually did file the lien and what is the payment amount, and if they paid the thing off in full. Prints 3 copies, you keep one, you mail the 2 to the other party. Now, you can do a partial release. You can file a withdrawal of your lien claim. Occasionally, you'll get a guy say, hey, I've paid you in full. I want the claim withdrawn. You say, well, I'll give you a release. They'll say, no, I want you to say it never existed. Well, if you got cash and it's in the bank, then fine, you can do a withdrawal, and that simply removes your mechanics lien. You could do a bond or lien claim release. That would always do it if you've done a stop notice in the state of California. You should do that also. Okay, you go to print it. Again, it's got to be, this one has to be notarized. And then it prints out your document. Okay. That is the basics of our program, Lien Writer. This is a system that basically you use to do your notices, to do your mailings and things like that. 90% of your work is just doing this kind of stuff. All right, the most important thing, and I can't emphasize this enough, is to get a notice out within the required time of the law, all right? It's different for different states. We have a help file up here, whoops. You can go look up just what is required. And I mention this because Oregon, which I know some of you do business in, has got an 8-day requirement for doing a preliminary notice, whereas California's got a 20-day requirement. Nevada, it's 30 days. You just not going to make sure you get that notice out within the required terms of the law. You can look up any state in the union in the help file under individual states, provinces, and territories. If you want to look up Nevada, it'll tell you right there, notice to owner private work. It tells you required, how fast you got to get it to them, and no more than 30 days after the first, 31 days after the first furnishing of labor materials, etc. So if you're going into a state you don't know anything about, you might want to go look it up. In Oregon, preliminary notice. There's one where you only can do a preliminary notice for prior 8 days. This is one you got to tell your sales staff. If you do an Oregon sale, I want it on my desk after you set up the sale, and then you can do your notice. Now, people ask me, is it illegal to send a preliminary notice out before we've actually shipped the items to them? Yeah, you can send a preliminary notice out. All you're doing is advising them that you have a right to do this in the event you aren't paid. Okay, but doesn't mean you're going to do it. Doesn't mean anything's going to happen. But you don't do it, you lose the rights. In these states, okay, like California, like Oregon, what happens is the courts have determined that every day you go past your preliminary notice deadline, they start cutting off a day backwards. So if you're on the first day you ship the majority of your work, it's now the 21st day. You only can collect the prior days. You can't go after them specifically to recover that money. Now can you get to the customer? Sure you can. Not anything. But you want to have that 20-day notice because this binds this guy in iron. Your notice is good. He's got to make sure you get paid. Okay, on the basic systems, anybody have any questions now?
Yeah, Frank, I got one. So after you print the notice, you need to sign it. Now, do you know about the legal validity or lack thereof of using a stamp signature like many doctors do? Can we do that?
If it's a preliminary notice, it doesn't matter. Now, as to if you're talking about a mechanics lien or a release, that's a gray area. I know people that do it. I've never heard anybody get any complaints about it. The law says it must be signed. If a stamp signature is deemed legal in that state, no problem.
Okay.
All right. And as far as I know, I think you're fine on using the stamp until you hear something different or some attorney, screws up the whole thing by saying, oh, his client on a $10,000 claim was cheated, et cetera, et cetera. Then there could be an issue.
Okay.
Okay. Now, as to setting it up for signatures, okay, I mentioned on the preliminary notices, you don't have to actually sign them. Two places you can change that. Now, on the pettit form options, if you've got it set up as a pettit form, if you say print signature line, it will print a signature line on the forms. If you don't, it won't. If you want on the plain paper forms, I added this a few years ago, you don't want to have a signature line print on it, you can check on this box. It will have the name, will have the title, it will have the phone number to contact them at, but it won't put a signature line on there. That's fine on preliminary notices. Every state in the union.
Preliminary notices don't even need a signature?
They need an identifying party. They don't need a physical signature. No.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it just makes it a lot easier, especially when you're using like pettit forms. You want to pump those things out and just get them out. And then if they got to go, find you and say, okay, here's a stack, boom, sign them all. Then you've got to go through that stack, sign every single one of them. This makes it a lot faster.
Oh yeah, doing 120 signatures a day can be fun.
They drive men nuts. Yeah, but that's a way to get rid of them. So I don't know if you're using pettit forms, but if you don't want the plain paper forms to have a signature line on it, just check that.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Yeah. Any other questions on using the system? Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for coming to this little seminar. Now, like I said, we may have an announcement of our full seminar, fairly soon. That one, costs money, but then again, I go through about 3 to 4 hours of discussion with it, and we teach every single thing you can do in here and every single nuance, etc. Though I think for the most part, a lot of the questions you guys just call me up and ask me, hey, what can I do? What can I do this? Can I do that? I know, several of the people here have called me already and just asked me on that. And I said, yeah, there's ways of doing this very, very easily. And I'll show them what to do, and then they just start doing it. But I want to thank everybody for coming to our meeting today. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn you guys loose.
Thank you
for attending.
Thank you, Frank.